Workers who have a job that requires you to go into strangers' homes? What is the craziest thing you've seen? When I was delivering pizza, I went to a house and there were delivery instructions to go downstairs because the guy was in a wheelchair and didn't want to go through the effort of making his way upstairs to pay for the pizza. So when I get to this guy house, the front door is wide open. The TV is on with very loud volume. I'm saying, "Hello, I'm here," and not getting an answer. I go inside and look for the stairs. I was so confused because as I was walking through the house, it looked like someone was just upstairs. I'm still saying, "Hello, pizza's here," as I'm walking downstairs. Still no answer. Finally, I walk into a room and sure enough, there is a guy in a wheelchair, from what I could see, pretending to be sleeping with really fake snoring sounds. So I go over and wake him up, and he acts all startled. I'm like, "Hey, sorry for waking you, but is it cash or credit?" This guy in the wheelchair tells me, "I forgot to grab it, but my cash is upstairs. Can you grab it for me?" I go up and grab the cash, which was conveniently the perfect amount for bring it back downstairs, and this guy is sitting in his wheelchair. I ask if this is the right money, and he says, "Yeah." Then he says, "Oh, I forgot the tip," and stands up out of the wheelchair, hands me $10 from his back pocket. Like, what the heck? After I got back to the store, everyone was asking me how it went, wanting to listen to my story as if they were expecting something crazy. Turns out this guy was a regular and just ducks with the delivery drivers every time they go there. It was an inside joke that you can't be a part of until you experience it, and no one tells the drivers that haven't gone there yet. As weird as this story was, the worst time this guy ducked with me was when he paid my $30 in dimes, nickels, and quarters. There were even some nuts and bolts in the mixture, some of the other funny pranks he has done. For a very quick backstory, this guy in his late 50s and owns a small orchard. For the story's sake, let's call him Dave because I can't remember his name. It has been a while. Story 1 is my favorite for someone's first time delivering to Dave. Story 2 is just a classic that you got when you delivered to Dave after you suffered through the first one. Story 1. When I first went to Dave, I had already been delivering for a few months. This driver, Mark, had only a couple shifts under his belt, so he didn't really know what to do with stranger people. Well, when Mark got there, he was having small talk with Dave and made the horrible mistake to say that he just started being a delivery driver. Once Dave heard this, he put down the machine, and as he bent over, started taking off his socks. Right when the second sock slipped off, Dave stood up, took off his shirt, and started taking off his belt. After putting his belt on the ground, he just picked up the machine and finished the transaction. Apparently, Dave didn't say anything and just grabbed his pizza and went inside. Story 2. As the delivery driver, Riley, pulled up to the front door, Dave, holding a beer in one hand and wearing a tight beater, came flying in on his golf cart that he used to get around his property, slamming on his brakes right beside Riley, lowering his glasses to the edge of his nose, just enough to see his eyes, and stares Riley directly in the eye. Dave puts down his beer and whispers, "I think that pie's for," hands Riley the money and drives off to his garage. Story 2. Actually, today I saw something that made me laugh. I'm a postman, so didn't go inside, but as I was walking up to the house, I could see through the window. There was a guy riding a mobility scooter in the living room on his own. He was riding it in a circle, waving his arm above his head as if he was waving a lasso about. It was quite awkward when he saw me and looked pretty embarrassed. Story 3. Worked for Aaron's Rent to Own. We had an order to deliver a 65-inch TV, stand, and 2 recliners to a house in the worst part of town. Whenever we make a delivery, one of us stays with the truck and starts getting stuff ready to take off the truck, and the other one will go into the home to make sure nothing is in the way of where they want their stuff. As I was about to put the TV on the lift gate, my coworker storms out of the house and tells me to load it back up. He seemed pissed, so I asked no question. I get back in the truck and he's on the phone with the police. Turns out the entire house was covered in dog cat crap, trash everywhere. Mold on the walls, ceiling, and in the corner was a baby's crib covered in crap and dirty diapers strewn all around it. He said the baby was around 4 months old and nothing but a nasty, saggy diaper, and was screaming before we got there and after we left. We waited till the police got there, made our statements, and left. I never heard anything else about it because I quit shortly after, but I hope they took the baby out of there. Sad thing is, crap like that happened multiple times. Story 4. I used to be a cable guy. I saw some weird stuff. There is one house that I'll never forget, though. The house had an unfinished basement with just a cement floor. I walk down the stairs and there is a pit bull that is chained up to a steel support pole in the middle of the basement. It was skinny. There were so many piles of dog crap lying on the cement floor I could hardly make a step without stepping in it. It obviously reeked of dog crap and urine. I walked back upstairs, told the customer that I refused to work in that environment, and went back to my truck and left. I called the local police department to report animal abuse. I have 3 dogs myself. It made me sick. Story 5. When I was at college, I did random jobs for people on Craigslist for cash. Most of it involved building IKEA furniture, which people are happy to pay for. One day, I go into this couple's house who've just moved in, and I get to building their bookshelf, TV cabinet, etc. in the living room. I'm busy doing my thing, but I can't help but notice quite a few different people walking past me every few minutes, all walking towards the bedroom, none coming back. So I'm obviously thinking to myself that this is just another casual afternoon sex. I go to investigate out of pure curiosity, thinking that I'll just say that I was ready to build the bed. I opened the door, expecting to see a bunch of naked people. I saw was much more disturbing. They were all fully clothed, completely silent, cuddling on the mattress. It was a Craigslist cuddle group. I felt so dirty and confused. Story 6. I'm relating this on behalf of my husband. He does AVAC. Get a call one day to this house we've been doing service at for years, according to boss. I've never heard of the guy. Boss seemed kind of funny when he gave me the call. Customer isn't home and I'm supposed to go around checking vents, changing filters, doing maintenance. I walk in and there's junk everywhere. 8 by 5 foot pictures of junk on the walls. Hand-blown glass junk sculptures, lamps, throw pillows. Damn, even the cabinet was full of junk dishes. I saw a casserole that the handles and lid top were tiny bananas. So many bananas. When I went in the kitchen, there's a 5-gallon jug of lube sitting where the hand soap would be at the sink. Dude even had a junk-shaped paper towel holder. Where did he even find half this stuff? Every kind of knick-knacks you could imagine, he had a banana knack version. I've never seen anything like it in my 20 years of doing this job. Whatever floats your boat, I guess. But personally, I'd get tired of being stared down by bananas every time I turned around. Story 7. When I was delivering pizza for Pizza Hut, I delivered to a very shady part of town. It's funny because most of the people who answered calls would tell them we didn't deliver to that area. But I always would tell them we did, and I'd offer to take the delivery. I grew up in a rough area and I think it's crafty to deny people their pizza. So I normally never went into a person's house, as that was forbidden. But again, I'm not someone who really scares easily. So if someone asked me to come in, I would. It wasn't really uncommon. On this particular night, I went into this very rundown house. There was a guy behind a screen door who was like, "Come on in." So I did. I walked in to see about 8 people sprawled out on the floor and on beanbags, nodding in and out of consciousness. It was becoming very apparent to me that all these people were on substance. The guy who paid for the pizza seemed really normal and perfectly aware of his surroundings, but just happened to be staying in a house full of addicts. And here's the interesting thing. I think the pizza was $13 something, and he gave me a $20 and told me to keep the change. Good times. Story 8. I installed central vacuuming for a while. Boss told me some stories. He found over $10,000 cash in some old lady's wall. Now he's an honest guy, so of course he wanted to return it. But he didn't want to give her a heart attack, so he breaks the news gently. Turns out she knew because her late husband used to leave crap like that around the house, but she didn't remember where it was. It is always Christmas at some person's house. Always. They have a 24 hours a day Christmas room. Bunkers and stockpiles of food. So many of those. They always pay cash. Story 9. When I was delivering pizzas in high school, I delivered to a house and knocked on the door. When the door opened, I was staring at my estranged father, whom I haven't seen in like 10 years. He was drunk, didn't recognize me, shortchanged me, and didn't tip. Story 10. I deliver pizza, and one time I was delivering to this house, and out of the corner of my eye, I see a ring-tailed lemur just sitting on the floor. And it really caught me off guard, and I stopped what I was saying and said, "Is that a lemur?" And the guy was super casual about it and let me pet it, snap some pictures, and gave me an extra tip because I knew it was a lemur. I got back to the store and told everyone, and they were like, "Oh, that guy? He has a kangaroo too." Story 11. I was an aide for a state politician. She was doing a constituent visit pertaining to an upcoming bill and liked to have someone with her just in case. The guy ran a reptile rescue operation, mostly concerned with exotic pets that escaped, were abandoned, and his entire basement was outfitted with small reptile habitats for temporary storage. He had pools with small crocodiles. A few of those massive pythons that are so often used in conservation public outreach stuff, and even a little workbench where he repaired the shells of turtles that had been hit by cars. Story 12. About 70% of my customers are elderly retired. Went into one 96-years-old house and found a shrine, a for-real shrine, to Ronald Reagan. Not as an actor, but as a politician. I mean, she digs the dude. Story 13. I'm a caseworker, and most of the time I am required to work with my clients in their homes. One day I got to meet a new client, a 17-year-old girl addict. When I approached the front door, I noticed a foul stench and lots of what seemed to be dirt on the doormat. When she opened the door, the stench got worse, and when I stepped in, I felt something sticky under my shoe. The whole duck and floor was covered with rabbit crap, piss, and hay. Apparently, she took in 2 rabbits in a couple of years ago, and now she had about 30 of them crafting and pissing all over her apartment. Her laundry was piled up on the floor and already had white marks on them from the rabbit piss. The shower was covered in crap as well. Some bunnies nested in the washing machine, and one passed behind the damn kitchen. My colleague and I helped clean up this mess over weeks. Story 14. Well, not really too crazy, but it got me out of work for a day. Used to do HVAC and went into a customer's house to tape up vents. Have to do this to test the air pressure in the system. Well, in one room, he had a massive table for tabletop games. Win. Walls covered in Marvel posters and Magic. The Gathering cards everywhere. Started talking to the guy, and he ends up calling my boss asking if I could stay downstairs to explain what was going on throughout the day. As I was new, my boss didn't really like this idea, but the customer gets what the customer wants. Ended up playing all day and get paid for it, including overtime. Best work day ever. Story 15. Not crazy, but rage-inducing. Until recently, I worked as a repair tech for a telecom company. A few years ago, I was called out to a house on one of the town's more run-down estates. I knocked the door, and it was answered by a little girl. It was immediately obvious that they had very little money, no carpet on the floor, shoddy paint work, and a bit of a smell. The girl was maybe 4 or 5, and really sweet. However, she obviously hadn't had a wash in a while. Her hair was matted, and her clothes were filthy. She went to fetch her father, who guided me into the lounge where his phone master socket was. The socket happened to be located behind the biggest flat-screen TV I had ever seen, underneath which was an Xbox 360, PS3, surround sound system, and Sky HD receiver. I was damn livid that this little girl had to live in squalor while her father spent thousands on home entertainment. The mother ducker chain-smoked the entire time I was there, too. It turned out the fault with his line was down to his own internal wiring, for which we would usually raise a call-out charge. I waived it because rather than punish the father, I couldn't help but feel that it wouldn't be him who suffered. Story 16. I'm in Raw at a college, and I had to enter someone's apartment for a health and safety inspection. He didn't hear us knock and enter the apartment because his music was very loud, but suddenly he started singling in a Batman-esque tune, Nana Grandma. Story 17. Not me personally, but a coworker. I work for a property management company specializing in low-income housing, including Section 8. A few weeks ago, we had the manager of one of our properties call in freaking out because she was inspecting a unit and found that the guy was housing a full-size damn alligator in his second bedroom, complete with kiddie pool and everything. The funniest part of the picture I was shown was that the idiot resident put a little 3-foot-tall metal fence around it thinking he could contain it. The picture my coworker showed me was the gator with the mangled remains of that gate. This was in a southwestern state, and the animal control wouldn't come out because they said they weren't equipped to handle gators. Story 18. I don't have this job anymore, but I was selling security systems one summer in Indianapolis, Indiana. We would walk door to door and try and sell the systems to whoever would buy one. I was in a rather run-down, beat-up neighborhood and knocked on this house front door, and 3 guys answered, which in itself was weird. Why would 3 people answer the door? I said to myself, duck it. Who cares if they all look doped-up idiots? Picture Kid Rock. I'm going to try and sell the security system. So I introduced myself, told them what company I was with, at, and what the deal was. They all seemed kind of interested, so I told them I would give them a free estimate if they wanted. They said sure, and I went inside and started the estimate, basically counting doors and windows and stuff like that. I start walking through the house, go into the kitchen. The kitchen table was full. Running over with pot. One guy was sitting next to the kitchen table in a school desk with a scale and weighing it out. I immediately decided I need to be super ducking cool about this or I might be in some deep crap. So I turned to the guys following me and said, "You guys should probably buy this. With that being there, you definitely need it." The guy replied, "Right, that's what I was thinking. You're cool, man. I thought you would have freaked out." I relied, "Oh, I am." He paid me cash. I chose a specific installer that I knew would ignore the pot and just install the system. I made a sale and was on my way. Neither I nor the installer told the police because we didn't live in that city. Who were we to give ducks? Story 19. My dad used to own an apartment complex. I was with him once when we went in this guy's apartment to fix something. His apartment was maybe 500 square feet. Contents consisted of 1 mattress on the floor, a windsurfing board that took up half the apartment, and a lot of random but well-organized junk, trash, including a stack of at least 1 year's worth of empty shredded mini wheat boxes. Like he was a very clean hoarder or something. Anyway, I was about 8 or 9 at the time, and I distinctly remember this as the first time I realized that people are ducking Weird Man. Story 20. Not really crazy, just kind of amusing. My dad's a carpenter, and I used to come with him and help with the installations in his customers' houses. We were putting in a cabinet for this nice couple inside their study. As I was passing by the computer on the desk, I noticed that there was a web page open, and I couldn't help but laugh a bit at its name, oiwhatadeal.com. Story 21. Full-on hoarding situation, dirty room, pre-internet, boxes of tapes and some toys strewn all over a separate bedroom. Walking through house with owner, opens bathroom door to show me the room while teenage daughter was showering. Not as juicy as you guys felt shower girl was, but I was measuring out an entire house for flooring. Once I measured the entire house and drew it out, there was an empty space, about 8x8 feet. When I figured I was missing an area, I searched for it. My search led me to the office of the house. My missing space was behind the bookcase. Upon inspection, I discovered a hinge in an elaborate wooden bookcase. That's where I stopped. Figured they wanted hidden for a reason. Story 22. Architect was at a house to measure, take photos for an addition we were supposed to be doing. Knock on the door and hear somebody yell, "Come on in, it's unlocked, I'm at the back." So I start making my way back. Very old house, and the entire front rooms were meticulously decorated and maintained to be current style of the house. We get to the back and find the client, who I had never met, 80-year-old female in a nightie, smoking and playing Civ 5, 800 turns in. Full-on hoarding, but it's like rich person hoarding, so it's just all artwork and expensive furniture and jewelry everywhere. Even worse was going to the second level of the house, where she fostered dogs, but never took them outside to use the bathroom, so there's dog crap and piss everywhere. Nice lady, though. Story 23. Visited a very odd man a few weeks ago to discuss his rent arrears. His wife has passed away a few weeks earlier. He proudly pointed out the large photo of her on the wall in his hallway. The photo was of her, dead, in her hospital bed. It was taken from a really creepy angle, too. Like he'd taken the picture whilst resting the camera on her chest. Didn't hang around for very long after I'd seen that, to be honest. Story 24. My dad is a firefighter, and the call was for someone who couldn't get up out of his chair. It was a 400-pound guy with a huge ketchup stain on his chest with crumbs in it. Lo and behold, there's an empty bucket of KFC chicken next to the chair. The dude was so lazy, he squirted ketchup on his chest and dipped the chicken in it. Story 25. A story my dad, who's really big in the silverware business, likes to tell. One day he was on a routine delivery, set of kitchen knives, and the little rectangle thing you put them in when you aren't using them. The type like a box packed tight with tiny metal spaghetti noodles. He pulls up to the dude's farm and drives up to what he assumed was their house. He goes the front door and can't see through any of the windows. No light, nothing. Says it looked like the windows were covered with sandpaper. He knocks, and the door doesn't make a knocking noise. More like knocking on a solid wooden wall. There's no visible locks, and the handle looks like the one you'd see on a restaurant door that you pull to open. He says there was one car, but no one around, and he drove an hour to sell knives, so he cracked the door open. And a massive stream of dried corn kernels came out. The entire house was filled with corn. And that's not the weird part. It was a tiny property with a huge field behind it and a few cows, so someone had to be tending it. He walks around back, and there's nothing but a coop and a silo. He turns around to leave, and someone yells at him from behind. The silo had a door on the side. He walks up to the guy who asks him for the utensils. They were getting ready to butcher their cow, and the guy invites him in to unpack the order into their fully furnished 2-story silo. They lived in the silo and kept their corn in the house. This is what you get selling knives in South Dakota. Story 26. I'm a pool guy. I go into people's backyards to clean their pools. One week, it was a 4-day week due to a holiday, so I'm not going on the scheduled days. I'm cramming 5 days of work into a 4-day week. It's a hot summer day, and I walk into the backyard of this house, get through both gates, and I'm met with an odd sight. These two kids, maybe 14 or 15, are absolutely butt-ass naked, cuddled on a poolside recliner. I look at them. They look at me. I immediately turn around and they run inside. I see the owners all the time, but I've never seen these kids. Next week I go. The wife was outside, and we started chit-chatting. I ask her if she's had any visitors recently. She says no. I let her know that I saw some kids in her backyard, and she cut me off. She says, "Yeah, surprised you haven't met them. Let me introduce you." They were brother and sister. Story 27. I'm a student warden. I had to go into someone's flat the other day because of a fire alarm. I was greeted by a very drunk girl making pancakes, except they were all burnt. There was just a stack of black pancakes, top to bottom, each one blacker than the other. "No, thanks. I don't want your burnt pancakes." Story 28. I had a very brief stint as a salesperson with a company that sells and installs solar panels. House calls were a fairly common part of it. Usually they were as dull as dishwater, but this one time. So I'm sent on a call to this old guy's home. I get there and it's fine, other than him greeting me with, "Isn't this more of a man's job?" We go in to discuss plans, etc. His house is freezing. He goes and hops into his bed, which is in the living room. In fact, other than a radio, which doesn't look like it worked, it's the only furniture in the room. He invites me to sit down, literally pats the bed next to it, but I elect to stay standing. So I'm doing my spiel, standing up. He asks me if I'd get him a glass of water. I go to the kitchen and find out why it's so cold. Neither his fridge nor this massive freezer have doors. Also, they're filled with chickens and little else. The bin is filled with chicken bones. Plus, when he said glass of water, he actually meant old empty milk bottle of water, as there were no glasses or cups. I take him his water and, feeling uncomfortable, awkwardly joke about him really liking chicken. He starts telling me the best way to boil them. Best I can gather, his diet consists exclusively of breakfast cereal and boiled chicken. Anyway, he buys solar panels. I've decided to sign him up for a special plan I could offer to seniors who were struggling financially. Before I go, though, he insists on checking my bag as I leave, to make sure I haven't stolen anything. A few weeks later, I'm chatting with a friend who works in a bank in the area, and I mention my interesting customer. They reveal he's actually rich as sin, a fortune amassed over a lifetime of living a profoundly miserly existence and being a thoroughly brutal businessman. Story 29. I used to do the warranty calls for the construction company I worked for. A couple ones stand out to me. I went to a house where there was a complaint that the shower door leaked. This is the most common issue I addressed. Most of the time, I was just water dripping from the door when they opened it. Shower doors are water resistant, not proof. If you open a wet door, the water will and does drip to the floor. I know hard concept to follow, but I digress. So I go into the bathroom to look at the leaky shower, and this less than a year-old house had a thick black grime two-way up the stall. I'm standing there in my socks looking at it. I finally told the homeowner that they needed to clean it before I could work on it. Never got the call back. It was nasty. I have no idea how it got that bad so quickly. The other time that stands out, I went to go adjust the door latches in a house. Another common issue. I ring the bell. I have a scheduled appointment, so they know I'm coming. And this 15-year-old kid opens the door. I thought I smelled substance, but wasn't sure. I go through the house, adjusting the doors on my list, and get to the last one. It's in the bonus room and at a little attic access door. This kid gets all nervous and tells me not to worry about it. I tell him I have to. It's on the list. I go up there, open the door, and see this huge bong. Must have been 4 feet tall. I told him no worries and about my day, but man, that kid was freaking out. Story 30. In my final year of university, I worked for a letting agent that focused entirely on students. My job was viewer. I basically piled a bunch of students into a car, took them to 3 or 4 of our houses, and then back to the office where my boss did the sales chat and fielded questions. So naturally, I saw quite a lot of odd things. Several times people were using substances, and given my appearance, they usually offered me some when I came round, and there were a fair few vibrators noticed. But there were 2 standout oddities. The first was on my 2nd or 3rd day. I had to show some kids around a 5-bedroom place that 4 very rich rugby players lived in. They were a little surprised to see me, as it hadn't quite dawned on them that halfway through the tenancy, people should be brought round to view for the next academic year. And there was a problem. They told me I probably shouldn't go in one room, which they had named the danger zone. So of course I went in, and the smell hit me. Stale vomit with a strange earthy smell. And the mess, crap and vomit, stains all up the walls, loads of mud on the floor. I left very quickly and told the prospective tenants I didn't have a key. After speaking to the guys, it turns out they were only 4, as they had actually paid the 5th share up front for a year to clean their rugby boots in and use as an emergency humiliation room for any of them or their buddies who got so wasted they were ill, with the plan to have it professionally cleaned at year's end. I told them I'd look the other way, but my boss wouldn't if he came round. I didn't have to go back. The house let the next day to a group of their mates from the year below. The other incident was when showing a group of rather shy Swedish girls around another 5-bedroom house of uni lad. Everything was normal downstairs, headed upstairs and knocked on the 1st bedroom door. Lad lets us in, girls look around while the lad says to me, "A heads up, my housemate has a girl round in the next room." So when we knock on the 2nd door, I am cautious to wait for an answer before barging in. Sure enough, a "just give us a minute" comes from the room. So I show the girls round the other bedrooms without incident and go back to door number 2. "Are you decent?" I say. A voice comes back, "Sure, you can come in now." So I open the door, and the 4 girls and myself are treated to the couple, fully naked, with him still hanging out of the back of her in the doggy-style position, and both of them with big grins on their faces. Story 31. I work at a psychiatric hospital, and am sometimes required to join my patients to visit their home for many purposes, like retrieving documents. This one time, I joined a patient of mine and went to visit his old house with him. This guy was a professor in geography, and was incredibly intelligent, but was, unfortunately for him, also prone to schizophrenia, severely so. Once we arrived, he unlocked the door and we stepped in, only for me to lay my eyes on the most amazing house I have ever seen in my entire life. This man, in his psychosis, wheeled in hundreds and hundreds of wheelbarrows full of sand, thus transforming his house, living room, bedroom, bathroom, and everything into a dune landscape. For the trees, he used old Christmas trees, the plastic fake one. And scattered here and there between the trees stood a toaster, oven, a table, and some chairs. I looked through this house in amazement, and finally this man walks up to me and says, "You like it, don't you?" I can tell. Story 32. I no longer do the job, but for a while when I was younger, I did a stint as a concierge, porter, doorman in some very high-class residencies in London. Think £1 million flats and apartments sort of scale. And this was 15 years ago when a £1 million flat was a big thing. Anyways, I have a few stories to tell, probably a few of which I can't. But the one that comes to mind is this one lady. Really quite old, I'd say definitely 80, who was just lovely. Always chatty and friendly of quite old-fashioned. A little annoying sometimes. Always calling the desk about this, that, or the other that was not our responsibility. But we'd generally help her out any way we could just because she was so nice. I got the impression that at one point or another she'd grown accustomed to having servants, or a maid rather than basically receptionist. I carried her shopping in for her every now and again. And once time in her flat, I noticed piles of old theater programmed everywhere. She pulls one off the top and points to a young girl on the front cover, 1930s-ish, lots of leg. And she says, "I was pretty, wasn't I?" Huh. Turns out she was a retired actress, and in her day was quite popular. Fast forward a few weeks, and her carer normally comes in once a day. Not the nicest of people, but polite enough. Never stops to chat, which is appreciated in a job when you're sat on your backside 80% of the time, but usually strolls in and out as if she has nowhere important to be and maybe says hello once in a while. This one particular day, she's not slow at all. She practically runs past me out of the building. No hello, not even a look. And since this girl had always struck me as being fundamentally lazy, this seemed odd. After a few minutes thought, I decided to break a rule. There's normally 2 of us on front of house, but today, I was on my own. The head porter had the morning off, so I wasn't meant to leave the desk, but I left anyway. I wandered upstairs and stood outside the lady's door listening. Heard nothing, so I knocked. I knew she was in, as there's only one front door. Side door was down some awkward steps to the lower ground, and she didn't go past me. Then I hear something. Sounded like crying, but I couldn't be certain. So I push open her letterbox and yell in, "Mrs. Dada, it's E from downstairs. Are you okay?" And in return, I can just hear, "Help, help," but really not very loudly. I tell her to wait there, stupid I know, and that I'd be right back. I run downstairs, call the ambulance, call the head porter and leave a message, and run back up. I poke open the letterbox again, and she's still yelling for help, but now it's harder to hear as she's crying and moaning a lot. I tell her the ambulance is on. It's way, but it does no good, so I ask her if she wants me to come in. She says yes. I tell her it means I'll have to break the door. She just keeps saying yes, yes, yes. So I cross the corridor and take a run at it. Now I'm not delicate, and at the time was even heavier, but it still took 5 good tries to get that thing open. Pro tip, you want a secure door? Get Bantam locks. Also, that day I learned going through a proper door is not like it is on films. It will really mess up your arm, your shoulder, and on at least one attempt, your forehead. Once in, I find she's on the floor near her chair, bleeding from her head. Bottle of some booze nearby. Could have been vodka. Could have been gin. No idea. It was clear. And she's crying, and she's messed herself. I figured quite quickly this situation would have taken a while, so she probably got in that state earlier, and the carer didn't want to deal with it, so left, making me more angry. I pull a pile of programmed off her, put a cushion under her head, and stay with her, talking and calming her down as best I can, until the ambulance arrives barely 5 minutes later. Head porter turns up maybe 10 minutes after that and sees me, blood on my sleeve and holding my arm, poo on my trouser leg, a broken door, and 2 paramedics stood in the flat. He looks at me and just says, "Kettle?" And I say, "Please," and we go off downstairs. Story 33. Done a lot of canvassing for political. Never seen anything too crazy, but there are an alarming number of people out there who think nothing of answering the door in their underwear. A lot of it is just sad. I worked in a poor rural district one season, and you learn pretty quickly not to turn back just because the house looks abandoned. There's probably an old lady in there who doesn't have the mobility to keep the house in good shape, and she'll want to talk your ear off. If you're out during the day, you can see the scale of unemployment, lots of people at home. You can see their age on the voter roll, which drives home just how rough people are living. Lots of hoarders, lots of abused-looking dogs tied up in the yard. I once canvassed a house where I had to step around a dead house cat to get up to the porch. It looked like it had been there a while. It's not like every single person in that area was living in a pit of despair. I talked to plenty of regular middle-class people too, but it's hard to appreciate the desperation that exists in some parts of the U.S. until you get on the back roads and start walking around. It also shows what an uphill battle it is to win political change. I was only talking to people who are registered to vote, but even among those, many don't actually go to the polls or even know who's running. Story 34. I did in home sales for an orange-colored big box home improvement store for almost 8 years. I pitched windows, so I would have to measure all the windows from the inside to give a quote. One time I went to a fancy neighborhood, like $400,000 plus type of houses. Everything from the outside looked normal. Their yard was manicured, the house was as great condition, etc. The house was huge. It was a 2-story house, with at least 15 windows facing the street. When the lady who owned the house opened the door, she could only open partway. She was like, "Please excuse the mess," but then didn't offer any other type of explanation. There was only a small path that led into the room with the kitchen and family room. Every square inch of space was filled with stuff. There were stacks of new clothes, pots and pans, weird art sculpture things, couches, chairs, and all of it looked brand new. The kitchen was piled with dirty dishes of all types. The old food was still on plates that had obviously been there for at least a few days. There were tons of dirty takeout containers and a lot of booze bottles, some half gone, some new, some empty. I had to follow the little path all around the house to get to the one window in her kids' room that she needed replaced. The kids' room was the saddest room in the house. Gerbil or hamster cages. Some of the little furry things were in cages, and others were just cruising around, doing their rodent business wherever. The room was also filled with opened and unopened toy boxes, snack wrappers, and clothes everywhere. The kid was there too. She was playing with something on the corner of her bed where there was room for her. I measured the window, and then we went back to the kitchen. The homeowner was asking how much and how long to get a new window. While I'm pitching the windows and figuring out the price, she starts pouring herself drinks. Now I'm trying to be quick and wrap it up so that I can go and cry in my car. Anyway, she starts to tell me that she just got a divorce. Her ex was a Buddhist monk or something like that, and for their whole marriage, they didn't buy anything. She said they slept on little sleeping mats and had the absolute bare minimum of worldly possessions. I've been in hundreds of houses to sell windows. That house was the craziest, sad thing I ever saw. I told my manager about it and asked if we should do anything. He said, "It's none of our business." That reminds me of another story. One time, I went to this beautiful log cabin that was out in the woods. This older lady lived there with her 8 cats. The smell hit me as I walked up to the door. It was terrible. Even before she opened the door, I could smell the rank odor of cat piss. I think my eyebrows were permanently scarred from being in there. The cats would just pee on the hardwood floors. The lady would get a paper towel to wipe it up, and then she would throw it into the fireplace with all the other unburned, wet paper towels. I can smell it now that I'm writing this. Not cool. Anyway, I sold her a new front door. Story 35. I worked as a software technician for a very expensive piece of crap software for tracking stocks on the stock market. This crap cost a lot, about $1,000 5 years ago. I went to the client's house to install it, but it was man and wife, mid-30 etoiles with 2 kids, toddler and baby, living in a single room in their parents' house, late 60 etoiles. I sat with him and his wife on the edge of the bed as there was no place to put a chair for the PC, while explaining this god-awful software that I know they can't afford and won't use. Was pretty ducked up. Story 36. If you hire a mover to pack and move your house, we will find, have to pick up, and potentially chase each other with your dirty pictures and sex toys if you're dumb enough to leave them loose in your closet and drawers. Story 37. I remember another call that was very odd. It just came in as an unconscious mail at X address. When we get there, there's no answer at the door, and it's locked. So we call law enforcement, and they force the door. We found the patient, passed out on the bed in the master bedroom. On the way to the bedroom, we saw a display of sex toys on the dining room table, like a centerpiece. Very nicely arranged, but still a bouquet of sex toys. What was very creepy was the guest bedroom had a surgical operating table, a full-size for real one, some lights used for videotaping, a high-end video camera on a tripod with its cables leading to a closet. My partner and I didn't get to check out what might be in the closet, but law enforcement did, made us package and get the patient out of there ASAP, and then stood guarding the house while one of them was on the radio talking about detectives and warrants and never found out what was in that closet, but it sure seemed to interest the cops. So, apparently, spoke with my old partner in the intro. He did find out and never told me. It was lots and lots and lots of videotape. Most of them, according to the cops, were of what appeared to be young runaways girls, about 17-ish years old, peeing into a bucket as this guy videos them. That's it. Just epic crap tons. Hour after hour of runaway girls peeing into the buckets. Story 38. I was working as a location scout for TV and movies. In case you don't know, this is the job. A director wants to shoot a scene in a kitchen. There are members of the public who put themselves on a list, showing that they are willing to rent out their homes as filming locations. So you visit all these homes, photograph all the kitchens. Then the director uses your photos to choose which kitchen he wants to film in. Sometimes the director will specify a certain time of day for you to visit, as in shoot it when the morning light is coming through the windows. If the director chooses your home, you'll get something like $5,000 a day for letting them film in your house. As a location scout, you do this type of search for all kinds of shooting locations, not just interiors, but also gas stations, park benches, underground parking lots, etc., wherever a director wants to film. So one day my job took me to West Adams, a neighborhood in LA. West Adams is one of the oldest neighborhoods in LA, and at one time was the richest district in the city. The rich white people started moving out in the early 20th century, and black people started moving in. It's now part of South Central, so as you might imagine, there are some pretty rough and sketchy areas in the neighborhood. So I drive to my destination, which is this old, beautiful, but slightly rundown, nearly a mansion, almost New Orleans-style house, with an external patio, balcony area running along the entire second floor. I knock on the front door several times, but get no answer. Even though I'm there at the time, the resident is supposed to meet me. There's a long driveway that winds around the back of the house. So eventually, I decide to go around and try to find another door to knock on. I find a rear entry. I knock and I hear a voice shout, "I just got out of the shower. Just let yourself in and I'll be with you in a moment." So I let myself in. It's a beautiful old house. Wood floors, high ceilings, beautiful doorways and moldings, etc. But it's barely furnished. In the entire large bedroom, there is only a single bed and a single dresser, a couple athletic bags, and nothing else. So I sit down on the bed when I notice that there are these huge bundles of cash lying on the dresser, just wrapped up with rubber bands. There were bundles of 20s or higher, about 5 inches high each, and maybe 6 or 7 of them. The money was crinkly and used, not the kind of neat, newly pressed stacks you would get from a bank. The guy kept me waiting for about 10 minutes before he came out of the bathroom. I kept thinking, man, this guy is pretty casual about his money. I could wrap up all this cash in a blanket and be out of here in the blink of an eye. Finally, he came out of the bathroom. He was a big dude, very fit, casually dressed. His clothes were conservative, nothing that would attract attention. He looked sort of like an Idris Elba type. He didn't try to hide the money. He didn't acknowledge it in any way. "Sorry about the wait. Follow me. The kitchen's this way." I photographed his kitchen from a number of angles. The rest of the house was almost entirely unfurnished. This took about 5 or 10 minutes. Then I left to go to my next location. Of course, I never found out anything more about the man with the empty house and the large stacks of cash. To this day, I still wonder if I had wandered into some kind of Stringer Bell situation. Story 39. Friend of mine is a painter. He has told me that on more than one occasion, some female clients would accidentally leave things in the rooms that were to be painted. Lingerie, sex toy, typical stuff. One of his employees, after finding a devil-headed dildo, put it on his forehead and ran around pretending he was a unicorn, as one does. Story 40. Long ago, but not too distant, I received a call for a welfare check at a woman's house as she wasn't answering the phone as expected. I roll up some 10 minutes or so after dispatch sends me there and walk up to the door. On the walk up to the door, I heard music playing in the house and all seemed to be okay. Nothing out of the ordinary at first glance. So I open the screen door and knock on the main door. And it pushes open as if not completely latched. There, it swung open about 4 inches or so, and of course the music got a bit louder and I recognized it. It was Nin Closer. I looked around and noticed a vase knocked over. I later found out they were fake flowers in the living room and thought that looked out of place. So I immediately called for another unit in the area to meet at my dispatch location. I'm standing at the door and the other officer pulls up and I inform her what happened to them. Again, 9 Closer continues to play loop. I knocked several times even with the music off for that moment and no answer. So we informed our supervisor and with a phone call to confirm was given the okay to search the home on a presumption of something being not quite right. We announce we are there again and proceed inside. Searching. Nothing wrong in the kitchen. Living room vase knocked over. Dining room had a plate laying on the floor, and there was broken glass. We had already prepared ourselves for what else we might find, especially from what turned out to be the bedroom blaring music. Guns at close guard, we slink down the hallway of this ranch-style house and open the bedroom door. What do we see? Well, it was a woman dressed up in lingerie wearing a horse mask, literally ducking her man. Needless to say that split second, we all locked eyes and all of us freaked. The husband was probably like nobody's business at the time. Anyway, longer story short, she threatened to sue the department after we tried gracefully to explain our legal obligation on time at the scene. I think she was dissuaded, though, after she realized what we would have to testify to in court and everything we seen there. Wow. Big pink and black horse junk. Whatever floats your boat, I guess. Story 41. Did floor work for a while, putting down carpets or tearing everything up for tile work, new hardwood floor, etc. Usually the houses we worked in were emptied for us the previous day by some movers, but not this time. We walked in and instantly smelled something horrible. All the furniture was still there. Pizza and spaghetti were spoiling in the fridge. And in one of the bedrooms, there was a hospital bed-ish setup that was entirely stained orange and brown. And not only was furniture still everywhere, but everything was everywhere. I could list the possessions, but most of it was broken kids' toys and just random crap. The basement had a broken PS3, or at least outwardly damaged, an Xbox 360, and a few Nintendo DS's, plus a few shelves of what I assume were, never played, books of some kind. We were, admittedly, nosy. Most of this stuff was buried under wet piles of clothes and seriously just bunches of kids' toys. Plastic guitars and action figures and dolls. There were still pictures of the family on the fridge, plus generic kids' drawings from school or whatever. In the creepy room with the hospital bed, one of us got a little extra nosy and started looking through drawers. What looked like a normal dresser, like for clothes and crap, had 3 pistols in the top drawer. Off the top of my head, I only remember one of them being a Beretta of some kind. And the rest of the drawers were filled with boxes of ammunition. We called our boss and told him the house had not been cleaned at all. and we weren't sure what to do, and also we had found some guns and were wondering if the guy had been a police officer. Since there were badges with the guns in the top drawer, we weren't really sure what the badges were for, but we knew our boss had known this guy and his family personally. He told us he was not a police officer, and the story of the place was that the whole family, minus the father, had left with the mom to live with the grandparents because the father had met a girl online and planned to leave them, which ended up happening. It's not really super crazy. The guy probably just owned guns and a bunch of ammunition, used it recreationally and all. It was just so weird to us that he had left it behind, and honestly, I could have described this house for paragraphs. It was something straight out of one of those hoarders shows, and it was just super creepy because it was a very rainy, cloudy morning. The kids' bikes were still there. 4 lawnmowers were in the garage. Spray-painted police baton hung on one of the walls. Just a very odd place at the time. We ended up cleaning the house and ripping out the carpets. Boss came by and took the guns and ammo. Story 42. As a Domino's delivery guy, you're not supposed to go inside people's houses, but oftentimes feel pressured to by people, especially elderly or handicapped people who have difficulty going to the door. This one man was in a house the size of my bedroom and unable to get out of his chair. So I helped myself in when I saw this man with one leg struggling to even leave his chair. After setting his pizza down, he reached for his wallet, and I noticed how severe his hands were. He asked me to pull out enough money for the food. I'll never forget the shame on his face. He was not old, but clearly struggling, and very uncomfortable with his disability. I tried to act like it wasn't a big deal, and he mentioned that he'd had an accident on the job that cost him his leg and some motor function. My heart was on the floor when I left. I usually spent all my tips on beer back then, but I put half of what I had made that day in his mailbox. I doubt it was that much of a blessing, but he blessed mine by leaving an impression on me. Whenever I feel sorry for myself, I think of that lonely man and how good I really have it. Story 43. About 10 years ago, after my first year at university, I worked for a summer at a mill shop that made custom cabinetry. I was an assistant to the lead installer, so I would often spend a couple days at a time in someone's house, while their new kitchen or bathroom was being done. This one house had a pair of large birds, a cockatoo and an African gray parrot, if I remember correctly, that would walk around the house and chatter all day. At lunchtime, or pretty much any time of the day, the cockatoo would loiter around and ask, "What's for lunch?" in its creepy robot voice. The African gray, on the other hand, would yell, "Damn," every time there was any sort of loud noise. While hilarious, the novelty wore off after about a day of hammering. Another notable house was the one owned by an old, very large, very irate man with his mail-order 19-year-old bride. He had beautiful cabinetry being installed all over his house, which was completely offset by the horrible, new, deep pile hot pink carpet that was wall-to-wall, including the kitchen for some asinine reason. He also had no working toilet during the renovation and refused to supply an outhouse for all the contract. This wouldn't have been much of an issue had he not lived 40 minutes outside the city. When coupled with his horrible demeanor, I'm not surprised the contractors ended up pissing and crapting behind his furnace in the basement. Story 44. I deliver mattresses. Customer asked if I would move her old mattress to the garage. I said sure. It's late July, hotter than Arizona asphalt, and the old woman is too cheap to turn on the air conditioning. The moment I enter her house, sweat begins to pour off of me. I bring in her new king mattress. The old one is standing against the wall. She says she doesn't care if I drag it through the house. She says she's going to have it hauled off to the dump event. So, I'm dragging it a foot or so at a time toward her garage door. I'm dragging it down the hall. I drag it across the living room. I drag it through the kitchen. I drag it down the stairs into the garage and across a 3-car garage where she has me lean it against a pole. I feel nasty. The sweat is pouring off my brow like a freaking waterfall and getting into my eyes. My arms are slick and wet. My shirt is sticking to me. I take a seat on a riding mower behind the mattress and try to catch my breath. The old woman and her sister have watched me remove the mattress this entire time. The entire time, the old woman is talking about why she was buying a new mattress. It turns out her husband passed, and she'd just buried him the day before. Her sister convinced her to buy a new mattress. The old woman kept talking like she didn't really think it was necessary. I tried to participate in the conversation and asked how her husband died. The sister blurts out that the man he end his life. This actually freaked me out, because one of the first things they told me was that the man pass in bed sans the end his life. It took a moment for me to truly put the pieces together, but when I did, I hurried back into the light and looked down at my arms and shirt. They were covered in red liquid. I raked 3 fingers across my brow, and they came back red with red liquid. All that sweat I'd been wiping off my brow had been down with a bloody arm. They never said a word about the fact that the mattress was as saturated in his red liquid. I wigged out to say the least. Story 45. My boss owns an apartment building, and our maintenance guy was gone on vacation for a month. I'm the maintenance guy now. Had to go install new blinds. Knocked on door. No answer. Slipped paper under the door saying basically that I'd be back in 7 days at 2 p.m. Appointment comes around. Go to install door. Nobody home, but note on door says, Please install blinds. Thanks for the note. Big purple, double-ended sex toy lying in the middle of the living room floor. She must have known. The rest of the month went by as normal. Did find out from the other guy that she will ramble away about herbs and crystals and new age stuff. So a big purple, double-ended sex toy lying in the middle of the living room floor might not mean much to her. To all of you who have a job that requires you to enter people's apartments, what is the worst, creepiest, weirdest crap you have seen? Worked for a PC repair company. Got a call to go out to the country, way out in the sticks, to fix a PC. Had bought a new car the day before, so I was already irritated that I had to get on a gravel road. Got to the house, and no less than 4 dogs jumped up on my car. Further irritation. I ring the doorbell several times, and nobody comes to the door. I start to walk off, and I hear the door open behind me. Who are you? I'm here to look at your computer, ma'am. Identify yourself now. My name is How Did That Happen? I work for blah blah. You called 30 minutes ago because your PC isn't working. She reluctantly lets me in. My first step through the door manages to somehow offend all 5 senses. Possibly a 6th. There were a minimum of 25 cats. Sounds great, right? Well, it would have been if the house wasn't their collective litter box. Cat crap everywhere. Oh, and what's that on the couch? It's her 80-year-old hubby laying in his tighty-whities on the couch, barely clinging to life. She tells me to just ignore him, which is easier said than done, considering he truly looks like a corpse. She leads me into the computer room. I really don't care about stepping on cat crap at this, because my shoes are already caked with it. It would be physically impossible to navigate their house without getting it all over yourself. Did I mention the lady had it all over herself? Clothes, hair, you name it. So I roll the computer desk back to get started. Needless to say, it was simply unplugged. I swear to God, I'm not making this up. And I plugged it in and bolted as fast as I could. I left my shoes in their driveway, as they were now worthless. I honestly gag every time I think about that day. Story 2. 2 years ago, I had a job doing crime scene cleanup. We saw some pretty sad stuff. The worst job had to be an eviction. No one had died amazingly, but it was worse than when I had the opportunity to hold gray matter in my hand. The former tenant was an addict, hoarder with Hep C. Our job was to clear the apartment. Upon arrival, we discovered he not only hoarded trash and large amounts of clothing, they were scattered throughout the junk, mixed into every little nook and cranny. Given the fact that he was Hep C positive, we had to don our most protective suits and sift through and separate everything piece by piece. A total of 42 man-hours were spent in the abatement. We found diaries, telephone numbers, hidden stashes, and many other things. He mainly shot up in his right arm. I can say this. Luckily, none of us were Ed in this ordeal, and we saved the apartment. Story 3. My Phil is a telephone man out in the country, Missouri. He said he couldn't find a lady's house on this road, so he called her for more detailed direction. Turns out she lived underground, below a pole barn, huge garage. He said they walked down a 30-feet ramp, and this lady and her husband had a full home down there. Furniture, nice decorations, etc. The crazy part was the husband built the home around an aquifer he came across while digging. The aquifer was contained in the back part of the house, and they built a little bridge over it, all underground. Weird, but totally cool. Story 4. This one was scary, gross, and sad all at the same time. I worked as a contractor for the local electric utility company installing energy-efficient light bulbs and plumbing fixtures in apartments. The landlords would call us, schedule an appointment, and then often not even tell their tenants we were. On one specific appointment, my partner and I roll up to the duplex. It's in a nice area, but an absolute crap hole. Grass not cut all year, old appliances all over the yard, just a ducking peat. The unit we were scheduled to do was upstairs. We walk up to the porch and you can hear death metal music just blaring. This is probably at noon. We knock on the door. No answer. After a few minutes, we call the landlord. He says he'll come over to let us in. He comes over, unlocks the door, says it's all yours, and leaves. We slowly walk up the stairs, the music getting louder and louder. We walk into what you'd swear was a filming set for a Breaking Bad addict's apartment. In fairness, I never saw any substances, but it was absolutely disgusting, and I've seen some disgusting crap. Every dish they've ever owned encrusted in decaying matter, submerged in a sink filled with water reminiscent of something you'd see pouring out of a power plant. The remainder of the dishes piled high on all counters and tables. Flies everywhere, clothes and rotting garbage strewn across every floor. Kitchen, pantry, bathroom, everywhere. We yell, "Hello?" No response. We turn to our right and see 3 fully tattooed, skinny-as-hell dudes with shaved heads, and no shirts on completely past the duckout on a single futon in the living room with death metal blasting. I turn to my left, and I see movement. At first, I thought it was a dog or a cat. I walked into the bedroom to get a better look. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. She had long, straight brown hair and was wearing a full-length dress. She was a pretty little girl and would smile shyly and hide whenever her and I would make eye contact, as if playing hide-and-seek. My heart absolutely fell out of my ass. She was in a room completely filled with garbage. Completely. She was playing in a corner near an overturned mattress with a few toys that were in the corner. I wanted to cry and throw up all at once. I tried to talk to her, but I didn't know what to say and it was hard to hear over the music. My partner never even saw her. He said, "Damn this," and went back outside the instant we saw the dudes on the futon. I did my job, changed light bulbs, installed a shower head, all while gagging on the stench in the house, trying to be quiet as to not wake up the possible addicts on the couch, and holding back my sorrow for this poor kid's environment. I called social services that night. No clue if anything ever became of it, but I hope so. Story 5. I once had to go to a house to install a computer, and I should have known it would be bad when the directions I was given led to a condemned house. I called the customer and said that the only house at the address she gave me was a condemned house, and she stated that that was indeed her house, and it was just a little messy. The lawn covered in piles and piles of junk. Absolutely no grass, just garbage, feet and feet high. I had to climb over all of this mess with a computer just to reach the collapsed porch that was held up by piles of moldy mattresses. Inside, it smelled like puke, onions, bow, and crap. I could barely breathe. Garbage was literally floor to ceiling, and a tunnel was carved through it to get to the kitchen. A little more room to walk, but not much. Ink candles were lit everywhere, illuminating the piles of plates with moldy food and tons of maggots and insects all over them. The smell was unbearable. The lady insisted that their house was a little messy because someone in the family passed recently. Well, it was obvious by the smell they didn't find him, her and all the garbage yet. Basically, I just dropped the computer and left. I lied and said I couldn't set it up since they didn't have a standard outlet. They really didn't. It was 3 wires coming out of the wall, which I wasn't about to touch. The smell was so bad I drove to a Sheetz gas station afterwards and threw up repeatedly in their bathroom. I then took off all my clothes down to my boxers, threw them out, and drove home to take multiple showers and change before going back into work. I could still smell the smell for a day afterwards, and for weeks in the work vehicle. You know the show Hoarders? I've seen all episodes and not one single house came close to the house I mentioned above. Not one. I also had a house with toothless mullet lady who let her pet boa constrictor roam around the house that she never warned me about. She chased me out of the house when she found out I picked it up. It was so heavy, and put it in a closet until I was done setting her computer up. I had no choice. I discovered the thing while I was on the ground, under her desk hooking up wires. It was looking right at me. Story 6. I used to work for a police fundraising company. We were doing a drive out in central PA. It was based in State College, the town where Penn State is for those of you not in the know, but we covered the surrounding counties. Well, there's a tiny town not too far out of town called Osceola Mill. Mostly a charming town, although on a road map, the 2 main roads through it form a swastika. That can't be on purpose, right? Anyway, my job was to drive all over the goddamn place, picking up checks from people's houses. Well, one lady in Osceola Mills pledges $50. I drive out there. It's a smallish trailer down a steep hill next to a small river. The check was supposed to be taped to the door, but it's not there. I knock on the door and wait. Now, I'm used to people's houses being messy and cluttered. I find that a lot out there. I try not to judge. This house was the standard amount of messy. I hear the noise of someone coming to the door. The person that answered was a woman, had to be 350 pounds if she was an ounce. Okay, people get fat. I struggle with my weight too. The thing that made me remember this lady was her beard. She seemed young, like 20 at the oldest, but she had this scraggly beard hanging off her chin, like a line of hair 2 inches long across the bottom of her chin. So, yeah, I was polite. I pretended not to notice. I introduced myself and asked about the check. She gave it to me. It was her mother or grandmother we had spoken to on the phone. I wished her a good day and I left. I don't write this to laugh at her. That was just the weirdest thing I came across while doing that job. I hope she's doing okay. Story 7. As a paramedic, I am constantly required to go into the filthiest places imaginable to drag people out. One of the worst I remember, a cop was in front of this trailer, and as I walked up, he just smiled and said, "Be prepared." I walk into blood, guts, and chicken feathers everywhere. Inside was a dude with pure crazy in his eyes waiting for me. I asked him what going on. He explained that he had quit taking his meds and was demonstrating to his children where food came from. Story 8. I had to crawl under this woman's duplex to run a wire. In her living room, she had 4 dogs in a cage that was nailed to the floor. Under the floor, in the same spot, were stalactites from where the dogs had been peeing over the years. Another time we went to this woman's house. You could smell the horrible smell outside in the driveway. We tried the front door but was told to go around back. We couldn't get in the front door because the door was blocked by used diapers. We then made our way around the garbage to the bathroom where her husband had taken the computer apart in the bathtub. Most of his tools were rusted together sitting in the sink. This is no exaggeration. There was something growing out of the toilet onto the floor of this bathroom. There was garbage everywhere in this home. What was sad was the woman had a baby in there. All she could talk about was being happy that the state gave her baby back to her. I felt uncomfortable on many levels. Story 9. real estate appraiser, all kinds of screwed up crap. Worst one for me, though. I found a guy in the basement of a vacant, foreclosed house, flat on his back and a little charred. Apparently, he tried to steal the electrical wiring to go with his copper plumbing stash, and the electricity was still on. I'll never forget the smell. Story 10. I work for a moving company that mainly moves old people out of their houses and into retirement homes. The very first house I helped with was for a woman who had stage 1 dementia. Apparently, over the course of her life, she had been a stay-at-home mom while her husband worked. But as kids moved out of the house, she started to fill their rooms with teddy bears. By the time we got there, we found out she had her bears insured for over $150,000. In the process of cleaning their house out, I filled up an industrial-sized dumpster 1.25 times with just trash. Story 11. My dad is an electrician, and a while back, he had a job testing the wiring in council property. Once he walked into a flat where the tenants kept way too many pets. Cats, dogs, birds, absolutely everywhere. Whilst he was testing a socket in the living room, a damn tortoise emerged from under the sofa and casually made its way past him. The tenants later told him that they had forgotten that they even owned the thing. Story 12. Former wireless internet installer, 1. Sex toy in the family room. I was young, so it creeped me out too. Customer's daughter hitting on my 20-year-old self. Awkward. 3. The Armory, aka the largest personal collection of firearms that I have ever seen. He asked me if I liked guns, sort of do, and if I want to go to the range. Didn't. 4. Taxidermied golden retriever, all covered in dust and sitting in a corner. It was just so damn odd. Didn't ask about it, just installed and got back into the truck. 5. Best part, a card from a guy who was an IT recruiter. He got me a real job. No more crafty internet installs. Story 13. When I was painting, I walked into an apartment once and gagged at the smell. As I ventured deeper into the hellhole, I realized the smell was stale cigarettes, piss, and crap. The woman had a mentally challenged son who was about 5 years old. She apparently didn't find it necessary to help the kid, and he ended up turning every surface in the apartment into a toilet. I had to leave after a few minutes because I was so nauseous. I also walked into an apartment to see a small mountain of substances on a coffee table. The guys that lived there told me, "You didn't see anything, Painter. You got that." I got that. Story 14. Years ago, I had a job in apartment maintenance. I saw some crazy stuff over the years, but by far the worst was one unit had a work order for a jammed garbage disposal. I knocked on the door, but no answer. When I went in, there was foil all over the windows, and the only light was from several strands of Christmas lights. There was a terrible smell in the place, and when I finally got over to the light switch, I saw what the deal was. All over the dining and living room were clothes hangers on wires. Dangling from the hangers were strands of meat. I noped the duck out there, pronto. It was way too chainsaw for my pay rate. I never met them, but I think they were from the Middle East somewhere and were aging the meat, but it was pretty freaky. Their garbage disposal is probably still jammed. Story 15. A question I can actually answer. Don't duck this up, Eugene. I'm a contractor under Home Depot, so part of my job is to measure people's bathrooms and or basements. One time I visited this old couple who wanted their 2 bathrooms renovated. I finished measuring the bathroom upstairs rather quick, so I moved to the downstairs bathroom in which I found, well, a grow-op. These old people were growing substances in their basement. I was in shock and didn't really say anything, in which the old lady realized and actually offered me some if I wanted it. Story 16. I was working maintenance at an apartment community. It was a ridiculously hot day in July. We got a call that a resident had white worms coming from under their bathtub. I grabbed the keys and head over there. Sure enough, those white worms were maggots. So I radioed to my manager and let him know what was going on. I thought of 2 things. Is someone ducking buried under this bathtub? Or was there a sewage backup problem? It was the middle of July. The hallways were open-air hallways that led to the apartments. When I went back up to the office to get my carpet knife to remove the caulking on the tub, I decided to call the neighbor and leave a message that I might have to go into their apartment to see if there was a problem in their bathroom, the walls touched. I grabbed the set of keys and jumped in the golf cart and headed over. I parked in the back of the building. The back was grass, so I would not take up a parking spot. And as I walked by the neighboring apartment, I smelled something god-awful. I was pretty sure what it was, but I pushed the thought out of my mind and searched for a better explanation. I knocked on the door and received no answer. 3 knocks, and then I shouted, "Maintenance entering the apartment." When I opened the door, I was greeted with a wall of flies. When I say a wall of flies, I cannot paint the picture detailed enough. It was like a snowy channel on television. The smell and heat hit me, and I immediately pulled my shirt up over my nose. As I looked inside the apartment, I radioed back to my boss and asked him to come take a look. When we walked in, there was a faux ceiling beam in the living room that divided that and the dining room. There was a hole that was broken through and drywall crumbles all over the ground. We walked further into the apartment. There he was, a man that had punctured a hole above his door frame, tied a telephone cord and the sash of his robe around that. I have never in my life seen anything more horrifying. He was a translucent green color. I immediately vomited and ran outside crying and scared to death. I called the office staff and 911. I'll never get that image out of my head. I learned that he passed for 3 weeks with all electricity switched off via the apartment breaker. So he was literally baking in there. Ugh. What got me the most as I was thinking about it over the next few weeks was that underneath his chair there was an ashtray with 100s of cigarette butts in it, and the fact that he tried to do it in his living room, failed, and then did it again. Story 17. I was a case manager for adults with developmental disabilities. I had a client who had a moderate to severe cognitive disability and lived by himself in his own apartment. One day, when I went to check up on him, I knocked on the front door, and a different man opened the door. The man who answered the door frantically started talking to me about my job, money, banks. He looked homeless and on substance. My client was laying on the couch, not moving or talking. After about 10 minutes of trying to figure out what the heck was happening, I hear someone come in through the back door of the apartment. The first guy goes back into the bedroom, and I can hear him arguing with the man who entered the back door. The first guy comes out and tries to tell me that it was just the TV. As the second guy walks out of the bedroom right behind him, they started to ask me if I could give them a ride to the bank. I noped the duck out of there. Told my client to call me at my office. Called the apartment's front desk to let them know what was going on. Called the police to make a report. The next day, they took my client to the ATM and robbed him at gunpoint, despite everything I tried to do, without putting my own life in danger. Spent the next several months helping my client move and getting his finances and everything back in order. Story 18. I was doing some work with an engineering firm, and there was a lady who was complaining about severe moisture and water buildup in her apartment. After checking with all the other apartments around her and nobody else complaining, we went to investigate. We knock on the door, and the second she lets us in, we are hit smack in the face with a wall of humidity. I mean, like standing in Vietnam during monsoon time humidity. It's hot, extremely humid, and just walking 5 feet in, you're already saturated with water. We start the investigation and notice her carpet is soaked everywhere. Just squish, squish, squish as we walked through. I get to her sliding glass doors to her patio, and no word of a lie. There are 2 feet tall mushrooms growing out of her carpet. The water built up so badly on the glass doors and dripped down onto the carpet. She had a 10AX10A mushroom garden growing. Turns out the cause for it was found when I opened her closet. She had her son sneak in a clothes washer and dryer one night and installed them into her closet without having proper plumbing for the washer and absolutely no ventilation. So all the humidity from the dryer and washer were trapped in the apartment. Story 19. My electrician told me a story about one of his call-outs. He went over to the house to fix the lights in one of their rooms. He got in, and the owner of the place, a middle-aged woman, said, "Go up the stairs and it's the first room on your left." He walked up the stairs and saw a dim red light coming from the room, which struck him as odd, but he kept going. And as he opened the door, the owner screamed, "Not that room." He opened the door long enough to see a naked young girl sat atop what was her current client. Turns out, he'd walked into a brothel. My friends told me later it was a well-known brothel in the area, and the previous owners have since moved out. There's a big sign on the front door now saying, "This is no longer a brothel. Please don't knock our door looking for a shag." I feel so bad for them because they must get people coming up throughout the night. Story 20. Insurance salesman in Detroit here. I've seen a lot of disgusting places, hoarders, and people so poor they can't afford cleaning supplies. Anyway, one story really sticks out above the rest. I was at this woman's apartment once to go over her Medicare and Social Security benefit. She lets me in, and before I even get to the living room, this awful smell hits me like a brick wall. It was seriously the worst smell imaginable. I kept telling myself just to get acclimated to the smell, and once I do that, I'll be good. So I'm trying my hardest to do just that. Meanwhile, we walk over to her living area and have a seat on the couch. Before I go on, I should mention that there is a weird white residue on everything in the house. At first, I thought it was dust, but I'll get to that in a minute. Anyway, she ends up buying a life insurance policy for herself, and I'm writing up the application. Meanwhile, I'm sweating my ass off trying to keep my cool because they smell still hasn't gotten any better. I must have looked off or something because she finally asked after about an hour of me being there, "Honey, does it smell in here?" I politely said, "Well, just a little." So she said, "Hold on," and disappeared into the back. As she's back doing whatever she's doing, I happened to notice something on the other side of the couch, over in the corner. It was a bucket with a bag in it, and all kinds of other bags nearby, sitting on the floor. Curious, I took a good look at it and realized this is where she goes to the bathroom. Rather than throwing the bags of poo away after she was done, she'd throw it in the corner and call it good. Now I feel like throwing up. Just then, I see her shuffling down the hallway, heading back to where we were sitting, and she's carrying some yellow box with. She looked at me and said, "You're going to want to get up for a second, sweetie." So I grabbed my bag and stood behind her. Then, she takes the yellow box of what I can now make out as baking soda and flings it across the whole room, which is where the white residue came from, apparently. I couldn't hold my tongue. I was in such disbelief, I think I actually said no crap in front of my client. She was taking craps in a bucket in the corner, leaving the bags of feces in the room, and when the smell got to be too much, she'd throw baking soda at it. Story 21. I worked in security for a couple years doing alarm responses. I have seen a lot of hoarder homes. The worst was this one house. It had very narrow passages leading to the bed, the couch, the kitchen. I always do a full check of a house, and I started with the basement. There were no narrow passages. In fact, it was jammed so tight with her things that you could barely get a single finger between the top of her stuff, mostly magazines and old newspaper, and the ceiling or wall. I could smell mold and could see water damage on the bottom of the stacks of paper. I finally got to her bedroom and saw the biggest pile of sex toy I have ever seen in my life. They were floor to ceiling, jammed together tight. I'm pretty sure if I pushed on them, there would have been no give whatsoever. They took up about 4 feet out from the wall and about 6 feet of wall. I would say it was 8 to 10 feet high. The worst part was they were all filthy. I now know where dildos end up when they go to ass. Story 22. I used to work for the gas company in Houston. I'd have to go into every house, apartment before and after I turned on their gas. I did probably over 5,000 jobs in my year there, and the majority of the jobs were for reconnect non-payment, meaning these are people who don't pay their bills. So as you can imagine, I've seen some things. Of all the houses, trailers, shanties, apartments, and illegal tenements I've been in, this is my best of, nastiest. A house that looked nice from the outside, a nightmare on the inside. The resident was a middle-aged cat lady. The second I opened the door, I got punched in the face by an overwhelming smell of cat piss and general rotting. She beats out the other cat piss-smelling cat lady houses because not only did she have well over 40 cats and no litter boxes, yeah, piss and crap all over the floor carpet, she actually had a few dead cats in various rooms throughout. In various stages of decomposition, I almost vomited. I have no idea how I held my breath for the 5 minutes I had to be in there, but I did. Sweet lady, though. Creepiest. A few others have mentioned rooms filled with dolls, so apparently this isn't so rare. I went into this one apartment rented by an old man which was filled with dozens of life-sized little girl dolls. The guy was super freaky, and he told me stories about how the girls kept him company. Weirdest. One trailer I went into was in a Mexican trailer park, so I didn't understand a word the person said. But they had a pet pig and a couple chickens inside the trailer and acted like it was totally normal. No more dirty or nasty than the traditional Mexican trailer. Just strange. Worst? Shotgun shack in Houston's 3rd Ward. The worst of the worst. The ghettoest of the ghetto. 2 kids, approximately 5 years old, wearing nothing but dirty diapers. The house was in disrepair, probably should have been condemned, but was somehow defying the laws of physics by still standing. The adult in the house was an obvious addict. Funniest, I went to this one house, a gigantic house in the richest area of the Woodlands. TX and the lady who lived there was one of those uppity rich. 50-something white ladies who probably belongs to a country club. So I go in her attic to light her water heater pilots, and I see written in Sharpie on her air conditional vent. I came down and asked her if she'd had her air conditional serviced recently, and she said she had about a month prior. I told her to take a look, and she screamed, started freaking out, and started crying. As I was leaving, I heard her call her husband and say, "I told you not to let those damn into the house." Story 23. I used to work for a company that owned a lot of rent houses. Normally, I was in charge of landscaping and would do various tasks related to that. However, if the tenants hadn't paid rent in a month or two, they'd usually ask me and my partners to knock on the door, take a peek in the window and see if anyone was actually home. I should take a moment to point something out. This took place in a rural community that has a rather large men's club not too far away. Because of the cheap rent and the friendly nature of my boss, most of the tenants were escorts and bouncers. When I knocked on the door, no one answered, but the door didn't make the normal clunk sound. It was softened. As I looked down at the door, I noticed water leaking out from the bottom of the door frame. At this point, I used the master key to open the house. Water poured out around my feet and was standing several inches inside the house. We later found out that a pipe burst inside a wall, and instead of telling their landlord, they just left. But the water wasn't the worst thing I saw. G-strings floated across the lake like seaweed, constantly drawn to my legs as I carefully waded around. Broken high heels were everywhere, too waterlogged to actually float, and were in a sad sinking limbo. Handcuffs were dotted over a door like the old sock trick. Glitter was clumped together all over the apartment, giving the lake a strange shimmer. But what I haven't told you, what caught my eye immediately when I walked in, will haunt me to this day. There, floating around the apartment like abandoned boats, were dozens of sex toys. And not just your standard flesh-colored one. No, some were neon, some clear, some were the size of your forearm, some were tiny bullets. They even had one of those Sybian machines. That's when it really hit me. At first I thought I was just standing in a flooded apartment, but that stagnant swamp most likely filled with the juices from some sketchy escort. Called my employer immediately and learned that my partner and I got to clean it up. Elbow-length rubber gloves and duck waders were involved. Story 24. I worked in moving most high school summers. I got a few stories, from bad evictions, hoarders to criminals with whereabouts unknown, but one eviction was bad and sad. We got an eviction call and I'm with 2 coworkers on it. An apartment. Shouldn't take long. We enter the place and immediately we are hit by an awful smell. Burnt horror. A father-son lived at this place, and there was some sort of fire in the place. Burnt junk everywhere. We had to gather any usable stuff we could and load it on the truck. That was the bad part. Sad part. I knew the son from high school. Kid was a loner, and I think he was picked on as well. He started the day in his PJs on the couch. We asked him to please move so we could move the burnt couch. He does. Just moves down to their car and sleeps in there. Didn't see him in school after that day. I felt crafty that he had to see me there. Bad enough, the situation he was in. Seeing someone from high school clean up your home couldn't have been any good for him. Story 25. Over the summers, I work for my dad's carpet care business and do some side work turning over apartments for new renters. I have a few stories to tell. One apartment I walked into to find it filled with swastika. They even had refrigerator magnet one and attached small pieces of wood to the fan to make it look like one. There were pictures of who I'm guessing were the tenants with shaved heads at different Nazi rallies, and to top it off, the inside of the front door was covered in the most racist things I ever seen written in Sharpie. There was another that had the tenant evicted. It turns out a woman would take in any stray animals she found. At one point, she had 9 cats and 6 dogs that she never let out. She just had them do their business in the second bedroom. I could smell this place before I even got out of the van, and when I stepped outside, I was close to vomiting. Thank God we had been warned and brought the right gear, or I would have vomited everywhere when I walked in. To this day, whenever I think about that place, I gag. One, we had to paint the walls of a chain smoker who lived there for 20 years. The walls were black in some areas, and you could make out with detail everywhere he had furniture by the darkness of the walls. The walls were so dark we nicknamed it the Cave. Another small one is a tenant moved out and left his couch. As I took it apart to get it out, I found 5 used broken crack pipes in it. Story 26. Professional mover. I go into people's houses every day for a living. A laundry list of crap has happened. 1. We don't just come and carry your crap out. We can also pack it all up for you if you want. I don't know why people wouldn't go around and pack some of the more personal items away themselves, but they don't. 2. Drunks. Like, not tipsy or buzzed because they're nervous about the move, but absolutely crap-faced. 3. Cat lady. I don't need to explain that. 4. Women that hit on us. It's never like an adult film. They're almost never pretty. It's really hot out. You can take off your shirt if you want. No thanks, ma'am. Gee, you're strong. Do you work out? Do you see my ducking job? This is a workout. Worst one I've gotten was when I mentioned we accept and appreciate tips. We say this during our paperwork when we explain our terms and conditions. Crap like no exploding stuff is allowed on the truck. K. And she asked if I'd give her the tip, giggle, giggle, giggle. No. 5. Divorce. Separation moves. In most cases, both members of the former couple are present. Sometimes they're civil, sometimes they're not. We're used to a bit of screaming and arguing, whatever. That aside, I've been involved in moves where we show up. The woman says, "My husband's at work. He doesn't know I'm moving. I need the furniture from the living room, the spare bedroom set, and the small TV out of here by insert time here." That's when he takes lunch. He's crazy, and he has a gun. 5. Continued. I've had to call the cops because of the above situation going sour. I've had a shotgun held to my face saying, "You ain't going nowhere, boy." Quote, I'm not exaggerating. Yeah. 6. This isn't a bad situation, especially compared to the others. But if I'm in your house, I get to see a lot of personal details about you. I get to see what you like, your hobbies, what you value most, where you invest the most of your income. If we damage something, we have to pay 50% of the replacement, so we get very good at judging the value of things. We see the pictures, everything. We are in your house seeing every single room, and we are there paying extreme attention to everything we see, taking a mental inventory so that we know how we plan to pack our truck so your belongings are safe. Don't try to bullcrap us. It's just annoying. We've seen it all. Oh, it's so messy. I usually clean up a lot. No, you don't. He's just my brother. He's living here for a little bit because of... No, he's not. There's one bed, and the couch doesn't show the wear of someone who slept there for even a week. There's clothes for both of you in the master bedroom. I don't give a duck your situation, but don't look me in the face and act like I'm stupid. I'm done now. Story 27. When I was in university, my wife and I worked for a large property management, managing a medium-sized apartment complex in sort of a sketchy neighborhood. We had a lot of interesting entering apartment experiences, but one we tell people about all the time. There was a really nice couple who we didn't see often, But anytime we did, they were very pleasant and seemed completely normal. 1 month they came and gave notice that they would be moving. During their last month there, I put a notice under their door that I wanted to show their apartment. They came to me, told me they had a bit of cleaning to do, and asked if I could hold off showing their apartment for a few days. The unit 1 floor above them was vacant and was the exact same floor plan, so I agreed. A week or so later, we rented the upper unit, and now I wanted to show their unit again. I put notice under their door. The next day, I noticed that the corner of the notice was still sticking out from under the door. I hadn't seen any occupants for a few days, so I entered their apartment. The stench in their apartment was overwhelming. On the floor was about 4 inches of wood chips and feces covering the entire floor. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, everywhere. There were cages in one room and multiple books about breeding guinea pigs. It was revolting. We had the apartment gutted, down to bare studs and to the subfloor. After the repairs, it still smelled off. The residents dropped their keys off at my apartment in the middle of the night with a note that said, "Sorry." Classic Canadian. Never heard from them again. Story 28. I'm a face painter and I travel to people's homes for birthday parties. Thankfully, most people who hire me are friendly, middle-class moms, so there's not much sketch. The funniest thing I've seen in someone's house was a guinea pig city. They must have had at least 6 guinea pigs, and they built little houses connected with tubes all over the house. I kept hearing weird little squeals and whistles as I face painted, but I thought it was pretty cute. Story 29. Worked as a census taker in 2010, which was a pretty crappy job since most of the people who don't turn in their census are usually people that want nothing to do with you and hate you from the get-go. About 50% of the places I had to go were deep in the woods with no trespassing and beware of dog signs plastered everywhere. One trailer had at least 8 pit bulls inside wanting to tear down the door to get me. One of the many times I was grateful the owner wasn't home. The creepiest house I visited, however, could have easily been a set for a horror movie. It was more of a shack trailer than a house, really. Think of a portable from a school or construction site. The shack was about 200 feet from the main road. You couldn't see the shack from the road because of how thick the area was with trees, with a dirt driveway leading to the residence. I use quotes because the driveway, as well as the rest of the yard, was covered in waist-high grass. There were rusted cars, lawn equipment, metal scrap, random pieces garbage, and snakes everywhere. I'm surprised I didn't get tetanus on trip. The shack was in the same condition as the yard, pretty much falling apart with random tools and paint cans all over the walkway ramp leading up to the door. I stopped dead in my tracks when a powerful odor hit me. I could see the door was ajar from where I was. My first thought was that this was a murder shack, and if I got close to the door, a 7-foot-tall man would yank me inside. I wanted to get the duck out of there. I then started thinking that what if I was right and there's some victim inside that's still alive, and wishing every second that someone would notice that they are here. I tried peeking in the window near the door, but it was impossible to see in because of garbage and what was probably mold covering the inside. Finally, I worked up the courage to go up the door, knocking as quietly on the doorframe, trying to justify my pay in my head, while at the same time not wanting to wake whatever the duck was in there. After waiting about a minute and not hearing any noise coming from inside, I decided to look inside the open door. I quickly realized that the only reason the door was slightly open instead of all the way open was because so much trash was piled up inside that it was blocking the door. I could only see so much because of how open the door was and how dark it was inside, but it was more than enough. My eyes slowly worked their way from top to bottom as I was trying to rationally process what I was seeing. Large metal hooks lined the wall with large glass and metal jugs along the counter below them. Newspaper covered the floor, but not in stacks or anything. Just newspaper spread out all over, but also with a special gift. On them laid a pile of crap. Literal crap. From the butt. I know not if it came from man or beast. All I knew was that I was ducking done there, I got the hell out. Story 30. I was a resident assistant at a privately owned dorm. This was the worst job I've ever had, and this story by far the most disgusting thing that happened to me working there. I was on call one night when I get a call from the front desk. They said a resident had a clogged toilet and that they had tried a plunger, but it didn't work. At the dorm, we had a tool any plumber would be familiar with called a snake. I had never used it before, but it's pretty simple. Basically, it's a long hollow tube, curved at the bottom, with a long spring inside and a wire ball thingy on the end designed to break up clogs inside pipes. This thing is already covered in crap, never cleaned, and has only a token, half-torn plastic bag on the business end. I take this thing up to the room and knock on the door. This girl answers acting all cheery and says, "Thanks for taking care of this." No indication that this will be anything all that terrible. It's a suite-style floor plan. So 2 rooms have a very short connecting hallway with the bathroom behind another door in the hall, and they share the bathroom. There were 2 girls in each room. I opened the hallway door and was immediately blasted with the most horrid stench I had heretofore experienced in my life. The bathroom door was still closed. This was not ordinary poop stench. It smelled like death. I opened the door to the bathroom and immediately threw up a little bit in my mouth. The smell was indescribable. Nothing I can say would truly get across just how revolting this smell was. I soon saw why. The toilet was filled, quite literally, to the brim. Not with water or even just crap or pee or toilet paper, of which there were copious amounts, but red liquid. It was one gigantic mass of wet, crap-covered toilet paper all the way up to the top of the toilet. The only way this could have happened is that the toilet was clogged for days, and instead of doing anything about it, 4 adult women just continued to use it, repeatedly. I cannot imagine how or why they did this with the smell, but it's the only explanation. Holding my face away and trying not to pass out or vomit from the wet toilet paper was so dense that it took me about 3 minutes to even force the snake through the toilet paper to get it into the hole at the bottom of the toilet. It took another 5 minutes of twisting the thing and maneuvering and forcing the spring inside to go deeper into the pipes before I managed to partially undo the clog. At this point, I was finally able to flush it once, then twice. I had to flush it about 6 or 7 times to get everything down, including snaking it again. I walked out, washed my hands in her sink without saying a word, and left. I saw the girl around the dorm after that, and every time I saw her, I looked into her eyes with the most piercing gaze I could muster. A gaze that said, "I know what you did, and you should go to your grave ashamed of yourself for it." Story 31. NYC building super for 2 buildings in Hell's Kitchen for 5 years. This is one among a few stories. One of my tenants, a 32-year-old man named Evan, who lived on the ground floor, loved cooking fish, and he was a severe alcoholic. There was a bad smell on Friday, August 9th. I called, left a message saying it wasn't fair to go away for the weekend and leave the stinky garbage not taken out because all the neighbors had to smell it. Over the next 3 days, the smell became incredibly intense. So bad we all covered our mouths walking past his apartment front door, which was next to the front door of the building, gagging uncontrollably. On Monday, I had to go to the post office to complain that our postal carrier for the buildings was stealing mail with tenants' social security checks. He'd recently had a brain injury after falling off a ladder and started acting weirdly. As I walked back home, I saw a whole group of tenants standing outside the building across the street, looking at Evan's window. One of the tenants had called the city to report a bad smell. I didn't know one could do this. The special force team had just arrived and cracked the window open. A cloud of black flies came out like the Green Mile when the cooler air from the opened window hit Evan's body, sitting in the chair by the window. It would take days to get a company to come clean up the mess, so I asked the building owner if I could do the job myself to get rid of the inconceivably awful smell that permeated 2 buildings in the hottest week of the year. I cleaned the mess up with ammonia and a snow shovel. As a Buddhist, I saw it as a deep meditation on the impermanent nature of life. Evan had decided to do some substance. He had closed the front window but left the kitchen window open, so the black flies came in that way. His heart stopped from the coke. When his father flew into NYC, he told me I could have the 2 perfectly fine steaks left in the refrigerator, which I declined. The building owner wanted to rent the apartment immediately to a new tenant, so a quick coat of paint was put on, the floor sanded, polyurethane, and a lovely young Indian law intern moved in, which I thought was great because I hoped her cooking curries would soon cover up the smell. She invited me for dinner but didn't have chairs, so we sat on the same wood floor I had cleaned up only weeks before. Story 32. Not as bad as some of these, but I used to do home inspection. Worst place I ever saw was being rented by a guy to his daughter and grandkid. The kids were probably 12 at the youngest, and there were probably 6 or 8 of them. The parents were trash. They'd lived there for 18 years, rent-free, and I don't think they had ever cleaned anything. The carpet was black in all of the traffic areas and had been trampled down flat, so it was actually a bit shiny with the dirt and wear. It was green as you neared the couch and chairs. Walls had huge black stains anywhere people would normally touch. Switches were grimy. Kitchen floor was sticky and black. One of the tactics used by tenants when they want people to leave is to act like trash. They'd fight, throw things trying to accidentally miss and hit us, me along with the guy buying the house, etc. It must have been a bit uncomfortable for him, but he just smiled through it all. And we made frequent comments about how odd it was for people to act like trash in front of others and basically berate them to their faces. And all the while, he's smiling. We are touring a crap hole, and the guy buying the house is smiling through the stench. We get to the bathroom, and the toilet doesn't work. Not at all. There's no water in the tank, no water in the bowl. Thing doesn't work and hasn't for a long time. I ask the people what they do for a bathroom. They reply, "I don't know." What the heck? Tub had a panel board surround and it was mostly missing, just rotted away. And everything else to waist height was black or growing fungus. Get into the crawl space below the kitchen and there is a huge pond. It was collecting the leaks from the sink, where there was a garbage disposal. Turns out they'd been using the sink to wash dishes and dispose of food waste, but the drain pipe wasn't connected to the sink. All of that water had been draining into the crawl space, and they'd been digging out a bigger and bigger hole so they wouldn't have to deal with it for something like 6 years. The crawl space was basically making skunk-ass beer for 6 years, and that's what part of the terrible smell in the house was. Even worse after ID opened the door and let it all permeate everywhere because duck these finally get to finished up and we have some time to ourselves, and the guy explains why he is smiling. Turns out his wife is very particular about what she wants in a house, to the point she insists that every surface be replaced, complete redo of kitchens, bathrooms, all flooring, etc. He said she insists on it, no question, whatever house they buy. He explained how he happened upon this crap hole that no one else wants in the exact area he wants to live in, and showed the floor plan to his wife, and she loved it. Essentially, he tells me, I'm saving $80,000 to do exactly what I'm going to do anyway, which is replace everything. Story 33. I used to work for Schwann's, and I had a customer that had a bathtub full of piss and crap because their toilet quit working a few weeks back. She was wheelchair-bound because she lost of her legs due to diabetes, and couldn't find anyone willing to work in the unsanitary conditions of her house. She was a great customer, but I loathed going to her house. Story 34. I was working as a contractor a couple of years back, and we got a call from someone who had had water leaking from their ceiling for a week or so. Therefore, me and a coworker went to check it out, and sure thing, water was dripping from the ceiling. We went to check out the apartment above, and geez, it was unlike anything else. Firstly, it was quite a small apartment, about 3 rooms and kitchen, but there was a family of 8 living there. The family was of African origin and were new arrivals to Sweden and had been given an apartment and a welfare check. But here's the thing. Since they were new to modern society, they had little knowledge of how things were supposed to be done. They actually had laid out about 10 square meters of soil on the living room floor, and in their toilet, there was dishes. Turns out they tried to grow potatoes in their living room and had tried to flush down, or clean, their dishes in the toilet. Story 35. House cleaner story here. Highly respected dean of university, beautiful home. On the inside of his bedroom door was a key, bolt lock that looked like many escape attempts had been tried and failed, plus electrical wire on all 4 bedposts. Creep.